Good evening, everybody. The talk by Katie Vance is the second in the series under the aegis of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, which is hosted at the Department of English, University of Hyderabad, India. The chair came to us as a teaching and research unit in September when the agreement was signed between the university and the UNESCO offices at Paris. I hold the chair, and I have a small team with me at this point in time. Dr. Zaidul Haq from the Department of Urdu, and Professor Anna Kurian of the Department of English. Anna is unwell and has been unwell for quite some time, so is unable to join this particular meeting. But we hope she'll be back with us for subsequent events. The purpose, the mandate, the agenda of the chair is to develop courses in and around the theme of vulnerability. We have run two courses so far as electives in the department. One was an introduction to vulnerability studies, and this time the course that I'm teaching is colonialism and vulnerability, basically 17th to 19th century British India and vulnerability therein. We also hope to have talks given by members of the chair, but also experts from outside the University of Hyderabad and the discipline. And this was initiated in the form of a roundtable a few weeks ago, where we had people from environmental humanities, gender and sexuality, information studies, the videos of which are available online on the UNESCO Chair's website. We have plans for outreach programs and engagements with other institutions in the form of workshops and talks. The purpose of this particular series, a limited 5-part series, is to think through ideas of form. How do we talk about vulnerability when we wish to talk about vulnerability? So there are literary scholars who will document it. Amnesty and United Nations will document it in their own ways in the form of voluminous reports. Those working with quantitative analysis will give us statistical accounts of risk-prone areas, risk-prone people, and categories which the United Nations has itself evolved, like most vulnerable groups, MVGs, which are to do with people who are located on a fault line or in areas that experience rapid desertification. One form which several of us are particularly enthused about is the graphic novel and the comic medium. And this series on drawing vulnerability is the 30th anniversary year of Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. So it's, in some sense, a homage to a pioneering text as well. Is to bring together practitioners of the form, like Kate here today, Arijit Sen the day before, Argamanna coming up later, and people who have written extensively and in pioneering ways, like Professor Susan Square, who's also here with us. She was there for the Arijit Sen talk as well. So we hope to listen to Kate about why she chooses this form and what kinds of vulnerability she documents. So thank you all for coming in today, and we hope you have an engaging session. I'll now hand this over to the MC for the evening, two MCs actually, Atul Nair and Meenakshi. Over to Meenakshi for a formal introduction to Katie Vance. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nair. After a great start to the series yesterday, where we had Arijit Sen talking about 3 of his works, today we continue with Kate Evans. Kate Evans is a British cartoonist, non-fiction author, and graphic novelist. She is the author of Don't Call Me Princess, Threats from the Refugee Crisis, and Red Rosa, which is a graphic biography of Rosa Luxemburg, and was selected as a graphic book of the year by both The Independent and The Observer. Today, in her presentation titled Threats from the Refugee Crisis, Kate will examine contemporary British representations of refugees and migration in comics and animation, discussing the ethics of comics journalism when depicting vulnerable subjects, strategies for creating ownership of the narrative by vulnerable voices, and the practical power of comics to raise funds for refugee relief. Over to Kate for the talk now.
Hi. Meenakshi, can I just check that you've got the YouTube video queued up to play at the end of the talk? Because I forgot to ask you about that.
Yes, it's queued up. We could play it.
Excellent. Because right at the end, I'm going to show you some other cartoonist who addresses this better than I can. Hi, my name's Kate Evans. I'm just going to hit present. And then I'm going to press play from start. Hi, so I'm Kate Evans. I'm a British cartoonist. I feel that if I'm going to talk about international relations and refugees, I need to acknowledge from the outset that the British Empire was a project of white supremacy, which has had lasting ramifications around the world, which have never been addressed. And the economic disparity caused by the British Empire remains in place. And that is extremely pertinent when we talk about refugees. So this is my book, Threads from the Refugee Crisis, which was published in 2017 and is simply an account of my visit to this refugee camp in Calais in France, where people were attempting to come to the UK. The cover of my book also includes a picture of an American jet bombing a Médecins Sans Frontières hospital in Afghanistan. And I kind of like the way this can be read as a one frame leads to the other. So we can see a before and an after here of how and why refugees come to be. Because I feel that somehow refugees are often viewed by minority world nations as some kind of fact without any idea of what the factors are that create the situations that results in migration. And as far as refugees relate to vulnerability, is that I really didn't understand until I started actively engaging in activism on behalf of and with refugees, that the extreme vulnerability caused by someone being displaced from their home country. We're talking about a group of people who have got no political representation, no economic rights, and who are incredibly vulnerable to economic and sexual exploitation. Right, so this is my book, Threads from the Refugee Crisis. Here is an American plane bombing the Médecins Sans Frontières building in Afghanistan, hospital in Afghanistan. And when I showed this talk to an American college class, none of them had any idea that American planes had bombed Médecins Sans Frontières facilities. So that was a good moment. Here's the actual full cover of the book. Here's my rendition of the Calais refugee camp, and here's the kind of before and after that we see here. And you see here that just by juxtaposing two images without any additional commentary, you can still create a narrative, which is one of the things I really love about the comics form. So this is the first page of my book. The first thing we see, white fences stream along the highway, meters high, miles long. The smooth steel lacework glistens in the evening sun. Calais, the city was famous for its lace making, meticulous toil of women and girls sitting outside to make the most of the daylight. Nimble fingers, bobbins dancing, continuously twisting the threads. So what I have here is an establishing shot of Calais where I've managed to use some of the artistic potential of the comics form to locate something in a specific geographical place. Calais, there's lace in Calais, and I use lace all the way through my book as the borders between the frames of the comics, partly as a reference to Calais, and also because I wanted to make the representation beautiful, because I was talking about very ugly things. So I'm talking about the Calais jungle, which is a refugee camp, a very improvised refugee camp that was set up in 2016 to 2018 in France. As a result of the fact that the French refused to let the UN provide provision for refugees. Instead, the French police rounded people up and sort of gave them a rubbish heap to live on and thought that that would discourage people from being there. And this improvised camp sprung up. I'm quite interested in temporary autonomous zones, and this was really quite a wild one. The jungle, it's massive. I don't know what I thought I'd see, but I didn't expect this. A microcosmic disunited nations. So there were the different areas of the camp. Some of it was Afghanistan and some of it was full of Sudanese people. Politicians call them a flood, but of the millions of people around the world fleeing for their lives, this is just a trickle. Maybe 5,000 human beings? Nobody knows exactly. Nobody is counting. These people don't count. Now, the drawing is really quite rubbish in this beginning part of the book, but the material conditions behind that is that when I returned from Calais, I had no childcare, no time, and 10 days to draw a comic, and I just drew it as quickly as I could. And I didn't bother to go back and smarten this artwork up because I felt that the style suited the subject matter. Everywhere there is an air of expectation, of impermanence. People who've been on the move for so long are stuck in limbo, tantalizingly close to their destination, but the wrong side of those cruel fences is still so very far. There are a lot of smiles, which I didn't expect. Everywhere, little interactions, points of connection, life's threads crossing. So this is basically my account of what I did. My white privilege grants me the job of guarding the tool tent. We can give out a small handful of nails. I just want a lock. It's not up to me. He's worked all day, but I can't give it to him. We have 3 padlocks in a box and thousands of people wanting them. However pointless it may be, locking the door of a dwelling when you can slit the sides with a Stanley knife, everyone wants to feel secure. Shabab is here alone. He's 12. He's the same age as my son. He's growing up far too fast. He doesn't look sad, but I never see him smile either. We help him build his house. He's competent with a hammer and over-enthusiastic with a staple gun. My son wouldn't know how to use his hammer unless it was on Minecraft. I give him some grapes out of a maternal concern for his vitamin intake. I feel an urge to scold him for treading down the backs of his shoes, but then I realise that everyone does it. It's a sandal-wearing culture. That'll change when winter starts to bite. So I visited the refugee camp. I wasn't there for very long. I came back with a narrative of what I'd done. I wrote it as a blog post. I put it on the internet. And this was one of the responses that I got as a direct comment on my cartoon. This cartoon could not be better propaganda for battlefield veteran Islamic militant males invading Northern Europe if Lenin himself produced it. The situation would not exist if they very people breaking laws in Calais did not ruin their homelands with ethnic, religious hatred, intolerance and war. You are importing death. Now, I quite like this comment because I figure to have provoked this reaction, my comic must have reached somebody who didn't agree with it. And if that was the case, it must also have reached a lot of people who didn't know anything about Calais. And then I must have been formative in helping shape their opinions. So I incorporate these vile and objectionable, bigoted views of refugees all the way through my book. Because I feel to ignore them can be to amplify them, and instead by including them, I get to refute them directly. I also then printed up 20,000 copies of the comic, and I then distributed those as a fundraiser for refugee relief. And these are the comics, and this is my lounge, and this is my cat. And it is messy because I do not believe that it is possible to be a mother and a cartoonist and work from home and have a tidy house. And I'll let anybody else prove me wrong on that. So I went back to Calais, and my subsequent visits became part of the graphic novel that was subsequently published as Threads. And there's a couple of things that I did when I was out there. I mean, I was there primarily just to contribute to the refugee relief effort physically by helping to distribute goods and clothing and to build houses, as we saw earlier, or just make myself useful in any way that I could. But I also took sketchbook materials and waterproof inks and plastic covers, and I drew portraits of people. It's an intimate thing to do, to draw a portrait, to sit and study every feature of a face. The impossibly thick eyelashes, the soft downy hair growing on the upper lip. The kid's ears are slightly furry too, very small and rounded. They look padded. I idly wonder if he has his mother's ears, and I think of her thinking of him every hour of every day. The other thing that comics really allows you to do is to make, it allows you to meet people. It allows you to make very human representations of people. And this was extremely important in Calais at the time, because as Britain at that point was still part of the European Union, it was really important that Calais, refugees in Calais, didn't have any record that they had previously been in France, because under the terms of the Dublin regulations, that meant that they could be returned to France and their refugee claim would have to be held in France. So if refugees wanted to, if asylum seekers wanted to come from France to Britain, they had to make sure that they were anonymous. So a lot of representations that were directly made of people's stories or of their situations involved them speaking with their faces blanked out to camera or with their voices disguised. They don't have to do that with comics. I can show you people, but they're not identifiable as people for identification purposes when it comes to an asylum claim. So this is us meeting Alice and Hosha, 2 grown men in an 8-foot shack. They each have a sliver of broken mirror tacked up to shave by. I'll make you lunch. It's not a question. Hosha busies himself in his 18-inch kitchen, knocking 2 eggs together and tipping them into a pan. The sadness temporarily ebbs from his face in the process. Welcoming, cooking, sharing. You can tell this fits with his sense of how things should be in the world. And so the fact that I was showing refugees on the most human level, like showing each other photos of things and him making us lunch. I mean, I think a lot of the representations of asylum seekers that are made in the UK media are about them wanting to take our stuff. And the minute I show you that I went to Calais and people were very generous and kept giving me cake and food, that turns that on its head, that you're actually talking about people with a whole range of wants and needs and desires. What must it feel like to feel homesick for somewhere that it's not safe for you to be? So yeah, this is him making us tea. How am I? I don't know. What do I say? He doesn't even want to be here. The plan is to join his uncle in Britain, but the longer it takes, the more often he fails to catch that elusive lorry, the harder it becomes to even try. There is a big European meeting at the end of the month. They will work out how to help refugees, yes? The enormity, the immediacy of the problem is so clear to Hosha that it seems obvious that politicians must want to help. But Hosha, refugees can't vote. Didn't you know? Immigrants are always feared, always vilified. They hate you, Hosha. They think you're a terrorist. That's what we don't say. So I'll give you a flavour of the way that the book was constructed. There are some problematic aspects on the way that I wrote my book, and I was aware of it from the outset. Now, I still feel absolutely justified in making the story because I'm a good graphic novelist and it's a good bit of graphic reportage. But I think I should contextualise it by saying that there's something, and I directly address this in the book, there is an unequal power dynamic about a white Western woman going to a vulnerable population and distributing charity. So at this point, I show that I'm in a kebab shop in the UK, and I'm just chatting to this guy, and I've discovered that he's Syrian, and I'm like, immediately I have to say, oh, I was at the Calais jungle, because he was there as well. I was there, I was volunteering. And he's all like, why are you telling me this? Just eat your kebab. But I write this in the book. It's not a fucking day trip. Fuck misery tourism. What are we doing swimming about Calais, congratulating ourselves on our fabulous relief effort? It's not about a bunch of white middle-class do-gooders off on a charity holiday. And my friend said, you wonder if you're doing the right thing. Our relief effort is just a sticking plaster or a band-aid, isn't it? It's not really addressing the root causes of the situation. And I said, only in that it would hurt a lot of people if you suddenly removed it. But I mean, the fact that British and French volunteers were stepping in to create a camp in the absence of the fact that the French were preventing the UN from providing proper facilities, it was kind of doing the French government's job for them. And there were times when I was then involved in distributing food, clothes and resources where I felt like I was then being a border guard, and I was then being this person with all this stuff, all these people who didn't have this stuff, they had to come to me for it. And I was very uncomfortable with that. And this is the most important thing, is like, it's not a story, it's reality. And I didn't get prior consent from the people who I made representations of in the book. I mean, I did friend people on Facebook, send them copies of the book, send them pictures of the representations that I'd made of them in retrospect, and then they'd send me like little smiley faces and thumbs up. But it wasn't the case that they were in charge of the representation of the story. I was very much just, the focus of the book was like, I was just going to use me as the narrative character. And actually I make myself quite ridiculous in the book. I show myself as very naive and a bit foolish, really. And partly to just kind of highlight that kind of thing. So I genuinely did have this conversation with my friend Jet. I'm going to tell you, she said, I'm going to tell you something and I want it to remain confidential. And I said, I won't draw a cartoon about it, I promise. And I did draw a cartoon about it. There was actually also a story about that particular incident in the independent paper. So it's not like I was breaking someone's complete confidence in that regard, but it, you know, it highlights some of the issues that you have when somebody who is in a position of power comes into a position and then makes representations of people who are vulnerable. I'm going to talk about some of my other work, which doesn't have the same ethical issues with refugees. So I work with a charity called Bristol Refugee Rights, and they got me to do portraits of refugees for an exhibition. So here again, I was using the lace as an artistic thing in my representations. However, also, as I was drawing these portraits, people went, oh, this is a problem. They really look like people. And some of these people are kind of illegal, as in they don't have, you know, they could be being targeted for deportation. So then I used the lace as a way of obscuring people's faces in order to preserve their anonymity. And then this is my absolute latest cartoon. This is coming out like next week. This is something that Aston University in the UK had some funding to talk about refugees and migration, and asked me what I wanted to do. And I decided to do a very different style of cartoon about refugees. So at this point, I'm straightforwardly drawing a comic because I want to use it to educate people, probably British school children, who know nothing about the issue. I had to write a disclaimer at the beginning of the comic because it's going to go into schools, and I had to say content warning, contains refugee references to sexual assault, forced marriage, etc., etc. It contains references to the UK asylum system, because the UK asylum system is so awful. I thought I might as well give it a content warning. So I've got three main characters. I've got this guy, Ali. And again, here the style's very different. I'm making people into cartoon characters, and I'm making them into cute cartoon characters, because why not? Most of the images that the UK media puts out around asylum seekers are of them being like strange and menacing and horrible. So I'm just going to make them as cute as I can. Here's a guy from somewhere which is probably Iran. And I'm just going through some of the practicalities of a man in that situation, a family in that situation. What would they do? We're not safe here. The police have visited and threatened here. Once they know I'm safe, missing, they will take you and our children to force me to give myself up. We'll have to leave immediately. Let's drive to the border. Let's sneak over the borders to Neighbourland. Oh no, I can't work in Neighbourland without a work permit, and we've nearly run out of money. And the point is, the really most important point is that if this family go to an official refugee camp, less than 1% of people there are successfully resettled. So if you've got a 99% chance of your life in a refugee camp not resulting in you being resettled to a safe country, the incentive is very strong for you to then attempt to get to a minority world country under your own impetus. Then my other little character, we have Mo here, who's been targeted by, presumably he's some kind of Somali kid. I'm not sure. He's being targeted by gangs to join the army, and his mum pays a people smuggler to get him to the UK. And then here I included the story of a woman who's suffered sexual assault by someone in power. And I wanted to include her story because it really falls through the cracks in terms of the fact that she should be justified in claiming asylum, but hers is unsuccessful because she doesn't have enough documentation, and her case isn't considered to be serious enough to save her. So I go through step by step. It's very, very straightforward way about like the differences between this guy having to walk effectively across the continent and Mary, who she shows up. She has a student visa, so she leaves her home country under a student visa and doesn't actually realize that she needs to claim asylum until she's about to return. So the point is, she has a visa, she boards a flight to Safelandia. It's easy to travel with these things. And then, fun fact, the Safelandish authorities only issue student or tourist visas to people they think will not attempt to stay in Safelandia. Obviously, I'm using the term Safeland ironically here, but I'm using it for comic effect. So it's harder for a refugee to get a visa than it is for anyone else. And this is why I really wanted to show the roots of how the refugee system is meant to function. The fact that the Refugee Convention was written by Winston Churchill's government, I put Winston Churchill in there to appeal to all the flag-waving, patriotic British people and just go, but look, the Refugee Convention is a good thing. And the situation, right, and also very straightforwardly to point out that migration benefits minority world countries. The British population is aging, we have a need for immigrants, because they're predominantly working age, and that cultural diversity is a huge part of British culture. And I linked all these like international influences on things which are now considered to be British. But, and this is the point, Britain is a very economically unequal place. And while the super rich get richer, life gets harder for ordinary people. Politicians have decided that it's easy to blame immigrants for declining living standards. And in 2020, the Home Secretary, I called her Mrs. Pretty Petal, she came up with a plan. Yeah, I know we promised not to send refugees back to their home country, but what if, we send them somewhere else? So what's happened under recent refugee legislation is that refugees have been criminalized. Arriving in the country without permission is now a criminal offence. But how else was I meant to get here? Ali is allowed to choose Safelandia. The Refugee Convention doesn't tell refugees where they have to end up. Ali can choose any country at all. But I thought Safelandia is a good country that respects human rights. It is, isn't it? And this is the plan. Let's pretend that people fleeing persecution have to claim asylum in the first safe country they arrive in. That sounds good. It isn't in the Refugee Convention, but never mind that. Since Safelandia isn't located near any active war zones, it means we won't have to help many pesky refugees. Why should rich countries help people in need when we can pay poor countries to do it instead? So the British government have struck a deal with the Rwandan government to export asylum seekers. Literally, I think it's 120 asylum seekers for 140 million pounds. So whether that's a good use of money, I'm really not sure. And I talk in detail about the Australian anti-refugee punishments, where they indefinitely imprison people in Nauru, and I talk about the effects on people's mental health here, and also the economic cost of doing that. It's been an estimated $15 billion that the Australian government has spent doing this. And basically, the theory behind punishing people for claiming asylum is that we'll put others off choosing to travel to your country. But research into why migrants prefer a particular destination shows that people have complicated reasons. Maybe they want to reunite with family members. Maybe they think they can get a job. After the introduction of the Nauru policy, refugees were still aiming for upside down land, but we know it's Australia. because it seems to be a fair country. So either you make your country into an unfair, unsafe and impoverished place, or it's still going to be seen as a good option for people claiming asylum. And this really is what boils down to the economic inequality between majority world and minority world countries is enormous. Using minority world for what, you know, first world or the rich ones, okay? And the national borders are what holds that economic inequality in place. And in terms of the world economy, it makes no sense not to allow free migration of people. But in terms of preserving inequality, it does. And if I say that national borders are a fictional, imaginary construct that we should dismantle, that sounds insane. I'm sure that, like everyone, our sense of ourselves is very much bound up with our national identity. I mean, I am a British person, I have an English accent, I have a British passport. If I say we should get rid of borders, that sounds nuts. But if 150 years ago I had said women are capable of exactly the same intellectual things as men, and that black people and white people are fundamentally have the same abilities, that would also, within the terms of the discourse of the day in Britain, be seen as insane as well. So I kind of feel like national borders are the last big, great inequality that we refuse to see. And in terms of the political moment of what's happening in the UK, in order to be able to take control of our borders and prevent refugees coming across from Europe, Britain, the current Conservative government is probably going to campaign to take Britain out of the European Court of Human Rights so that refugees have no recourse to protection from unfair treatment. And that will also mean that British people will lose the protection of human rights. And I'm trying to make the point very straightforwardly that when it comes to fundamental human freedoms, we are all in the same boat. Okay, so that's the comic. Like the other one, I am getting it printed up. This time I'm going to distribute them for free. But I'm strongly going to encourage people to donate to refugee charities at the point when I sell them on my website. They're not up yet because my website has been playing up a little bit, but if you check out cartoonkate.co.uk in about 2 weeks time, then you should be able to buy yourself a beautiful, well, for the price of the postage, you can have a free copy of the Safelandia comic if you would find it interesting. So I was going to have a little talk about a comparison with some of the other people who make comics, again, kind of from a British perspective about refugees. This is Olivier Kugler. I think he's actually German, but he was kind of, I think he lives in the UK as well. He's an incredible illustrator. I have some amount of professional jealousy about Olivier Kugler's work. And he has been to refugee camps and created a very beautiful book about the experiences of what he met there. And the reason why Olivier's representations are a slightly different ethical thing from mine is that he went in as a journalist from the outset, saying, I'm here to make comics, which wasn't what I did. I went there to just go and be an activist and then subsequently made comics. Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. I just wanted to showcase his work. And I wanted to talk about Carrie Fransman's work. Now, she's taken just a more abstract, artistic thing. Now, this should work. I should be able to press play on this. Yeah.
Another place to rest my head, essentially like the devil's going to rip apart my world. I'm good.
So this is a comic called North Star Fading. You can look at that on YouTube. And it's done on this incredible kind of circular thing where you kind of zoom into the center of the window, and then the story takes you to another frame. And then the story is of somebody attempting to get to the UK and then is deported back. And then obviously the story continues on an infinite loop as a way of expressing the futility and also the, you know, something about the scale of the journey that people are undertaking from Africa, from Ethiopia, Sudan and Libya to Europe. No, they're coming from Eritrea. Next one. Right. Okay. So Carrie Fransman was working with an organization called Positive Negatives, and I wanted to talk about them. They are great. One of the things that Positive Negatives does is that they directly give asylum seekers and migrants, and to be honest, I don't see any difference between an economic migrant and an asylum seeker, because whether you're making the journey, whether you're displaced because you need to move in order to survive, or you displaced because you need to move in order to survive, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Anyway, what they do is they pair comics artists with migrants, so that migrants are telling their own story and are in control of it themselves, and they also have editorial control over the representations that are made of their story. So check out their work, it's brilliant, and it's great. And then I wanted to talk about, just quickly mention that some of the most classic graphic novels are in fact stories of displaced people and asylum seekers. Persepolis by Marianne Satrapi is absolutely brilliant, well deserved and very well known, but it's a story about somebody, about a child migrant, about a child asylum seeker. And Mouse is also a story of displacement, but it's also a cautionary tale, because remember the Refugee Convention was set up in the wake of the Second World War, and the avowed intention of it is to prevent genocides happening. If there had been proper refugee procedures in place for Jewish people in the Holocaust, and gypsies and gay people and political refugees, then the Holocaust need never have happened. And then finally, I want to talk about the work of Majid Adin. I'm going to take you back to the Calais jungle. And there's a particular place in the Calais jungle, which is this massive kind of dome structure, which was assembled. And in the dome structure, a woman called Sue was running an art space. And she encouraged people, anyone, to come in and do any kind of mark making and make any kind of picture. And there was a guy called Majid there who had arrived in the Calais jungle, and I met him there. And he had been an animator and cartoonist in Iran. He'd been imprisoned for a number of years, been released, and managed to make it to the UK ultimately. And when he first walked into this dome in Calais, that's the first time he reconnected with art since before he had been in prison. And when he made it to the UK, so here's some random art that was made in the Calais jungle. When he made it to the UK, here is Majid Adin. Now, he was hanging out with some people from the Calais Jungle Art Theatre space, and they told him that Elton John had put up a competition to create music videos for Elton John songs, and Majid applied and won the ability to make an animated version of Elton John's song Rocket Man. In fact, when he first heard the song Rocket Man, he thought it was about refugees. So I'm going to finish this. I'm going to stop sharing. So I'm just going to finish this by asking us to all look at Majid Adin's film animation Rocket Man. Now, when I did the launch publication for Threads of the Refugee Crisis, I invited Olivia Kugler, Carrie Fransman, and Majid Adin all to speak. And I made sure that Olivia and Carrie and me did our presentations, and that Majid did his presentation last, because You don't want to follow this. This has to be the most beautiful animation of refugees I could possibly imagine.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for sharing your own work and also for telling us about the work of other artists who have worked on the refugee crisis. Would you be open to taking questions from the audience?
Please.
Sure. Yeah. This is for the audience. You could raise your hand and we could call your names out, or you could unmute yourself and ask your questions to Kate, or else you could even post your questions in the chat box.
Okay, I've got a question here in the chat that says, hi, I'm intrigued by your use of lace as panel borders. What is it in the material form of lace, other than the beauty of or fragility, that made you want to make them panel borders? Does the lace's porosity, transparency have any bearing on the narrative? Meaning, does the material coax us to read the narrative in non-linear ways? Oh, I love it when people make me sound cleverer than I think I am. One of the good things about doing a lot of my work isn't specifically verbal. It is working in the non-verbal part of my head. It's using, you know, the picture side of my brain. In fact, when I'm actually drawing, like I have to put some music on or something so that I can occupy the word side of my brain, put on a podcast or something, so that I can just tune into the part of my brain that's just visual. I mean, I used lace because Calais is historically a lace making city. I discovered that Calais was a lace making city when I visited. I think we were staying in an Airbnb, and it had like, I think it used to be a lace making workshop, and it had like these panels of lace all over the place, and this like lace on the key ring and lace in a kind of a catalogue by the telephone. And we were like, what is this lace? And I was like, oh, okay, Calais lace. And then I immediately knew that I wanted to use that in the comic. I think I'm probably inspired by Lynda Barry, Lynda Barry. She's done this beautiful graphic novel called 100 Demons. And she uses textile collages throughout her work. And I think I probably was inspired on some level by that. You can attach any kind of additional meaning to it, but I'm not necessarily aware of it while I'm doing it. I think that, I mean, I saved all the lace in a folder on my computer called No Borders. So I wanted to draw attention to the borders, like in the comic and in the world. But also, I just wanted to make it pretty, and Calais has a lace theme is actually probably the answer. Okay, here's a question. Kate, I love the way you turn the focus on yourself as a volunteer to explore the ethical complexities of what you're doing in your work. Is that a comic's affordance, do you think? Well, I don't understand affordance. I mean, I was creating in Threads, I was creating a story with me in it. I actually started out in the 1990s as an environmental protester, and I used to live in a tree. We used to occupy trees in order to create like structures in the trees so that we could claim they were our homes, so that we would then have to be evicted from them to then prevent them from being knocked down for constructing new motorways and open cast coal mines as part of like environmental defense of the earth. And I started doing graphic reportage comics originally. So I started doing graphic reportage. Oh, okay, affordance. How can comics both show the scene and turn the lens back on the cartoonist so we can learn about her as well? Well, yeah, what I started doing was I started making political comments which featured me as a person. I took that feminist slogan, "The personal is political," and I turned it into personal stories of political activism. And so when I went to Calais, I was doing the same thing, but very much with an awareness that it isn't actually my story to tell. I'm making stories of other people, and I very specifically didn't do the thing which a lot of journalists do, is that they rock up in a crisis refugee situation and then they ask people to share the most grueling and horrendous stories of, rape, kidnap, murder, torture, to tug at the heartstrings of the viewers. And I didn't do that. I simply showed me in the place and the people that I met and the fact of their humanity. And I didn't interrogate why they were there. I simply showed that they were there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you do learn that much about me in Threads, because I'm sort of creating a bumbling, clownish caricature of myself. Not because I want to come across as a bumbling clown, but because I feel that the situation is in itself inherently ridiculous, that I have such a greater amount of privilege. And also because it was also really useful for exposition. So I have to explain what's happening from scene to scene. So if I show myself as a character turning up with a car full of goods and say, then I as a character say, oh, shall I unload all these goods here? And somebody else gets to say to me, no, that would be a really stupid thing to do. Then I have explained that the dynamic is that I shouldn't unload the car of goods in the car park because it might create some kind of unsafe situation. Now, in reality, I knew perfectly well not to unload the car full of goods in the car park, but by creating myself as a slightly naive, it means I can get to explain that to the audience.
Hello.
Hello.
Good one. Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I have seen your lace as the border. The thing is that I feel that it shows the everything that you present in the lace as a special world, and that which is not what do you say, something like what you don't get and what is really different from the other world and all these things. What is the take on that? Am I right? That's what I'm asking.
I use different lace in different panels of the comic to create different environments. So the Dunkirk section, where everything is always raining and covered in rubbish, I've used this dark grey lace in that point. And the points where we're in the Lidl supermarket, I use bright yellow lace. But there is lace all the way through it, including points when we're in the UK in a supermarket. And there are also full page spreads which don't have any lace on, which I use to be very sort of immersive and emotional. I'm quite a fan of using colour to create emotion, and I think I've been influenced by the Disney animator Mary Bell in that, because she uses these incredibly, I think she does like Cinderella, the 1950s, and Alice in Wonderland, 1950s Disney's animations, but she uses colour to create this incredible intensity. And I try and do the same thing with my full pages in Threads. But it isn't the case that the lace is only around specific scenes. I put it all the way through. I mean, the other thing that lace represents in the work is that it's an acknowledgement of female creative expression. Because I feel like nowadays I get to be a graphic novelist, and that's an amazingly lucky thing to be able to do. And the material conditions of that was that I was supported in it by what was effectively a universal basic income, which used to function in the UK and doesn't anymore. So I'm very sad that that won't be the case for the next generation of cartoonists. But I also want to connect my heritage to the fact that in previous generations, I wouldn't have been a cartoonist. Any creative outlet that I would have had would have been through other female forms of expression, which would have been sewing, which would have been, which could have been weaving or knitting or, and the next book that I'm going to be doing is about a patchwork quilt. a historical patchwork quilt, telling someone's story through the fabrics a graphic biography, telling someone's story through the fabrics in the patchwork quilt, but also with a focus on sewing. So there's definitely a continuity with that, and with the lace in threads. Like, I wanted to get those women in there making the lace, because that was a specifically female industry and a specifically female creative outlet, and I wanted to kind of tip my hat to that.
Really, it do fascinate the readers, and that's the reason why I asked you. It really fascinates, and thank you for the wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if anything's just a little bit interesting and a little bit different on a graphic novel, I mean, you have so much ability with comics that you can combine any picture with any text. And I don't really like comics which look like all the other comics, which may be why I don't get so paid as well as the other comics artists. But I don't like comics that just look like Batman comics, that just look like film noir. I always want to just get down to, doing something new and fresh with that. And that's what the lace provided for me on this project.
Saurav has his hand up. Yeah, please.
I've got another question in the chat, which says, your recent work's target audience mentions 13 plus. How is drawing for children different from a cartoonist from drawing for an adult audience? What is it like to talk about the refugee crisis to children through art? Okay, so I don't really I've done one comic for children, which is the book Don't Call Me Princess. But in general, I'm slightly, because my work almost always addresses adult themes, and because there is so it's very different in France. Like in France, graphic novels or bande dessinée represents about a quarter of the book market, and comics are taken very seriously as an equal form of creative literary expression with any other kind of book. But in the UK, there's quite a strong kind of thing. It's like, I say, I do comics, and then people go, oh, that's for children then. And I go, well, not really, because my most successful book is about Rosa Luxemburg, and that one has got a 12-page rendition of Marx's Das Kapital in comics form, and also shows riots and sex scenes and all kinds of things that you wouldn't put in comics for children. So I wasn't setting out to do a comic for children, but I was aware that with Escape to Safelandia, I was making something. So I'm making something that looked very much like an old printed comic. And so I was aware that it would be attractive for children. So I decided to put the age rating on, because I thought it's not really fair to have something that looks like it's for children and actually have it deal with very adult themes of sexual assault or torture or child labor, or all these child slavery. I thought I can't just draw it as though it's for children and not write on it, this isn't for children. There are actually some good comic books for there's some good children's books. I think Amnesty International do one that talk in beautiful terms about stuff that's age appropriate from the age of 3 upwards. That just happens to not be what I'm doing. Okay, the next one is, my question is, you play an interactive role in your comics. How do you use these individual interactions to portray a collective understanding of the refugee crisis? How do you decide which interactions feature in your comic and which ones are left out? Okay, so with Threads, I simply took my experience of what I saw, and I went the first time for 3 days, and then I went back for an additional 10 days. I've actually compressed the whole narrative, I think, into 8 days in total. So I came back, I wrote a diary with the very rough thing, and then I literally wrote the book in 2 weeks. It was really easy to write because everything that I had been through was incredibly vivid. It was really hard being in Calais. And obviously it's harder for the people who have to live there and who are trying to get to the UK. And I'm not trying to claim that it was really, really, really hard. But I think one of the things that was very difficult about it was that, you see, I've had quite a long history of active political activism. And there was quite a lot about the Calais situation was very familiar to me. Like, I think compared to the average person, because I used to live on an environmental protest camp, literally in a tree, I understand how you can build a shack and live in it. And I understand how you have to, what it takes to make dinner for 80 people. Like, they're like a lot of the practical side of sanitation and like was quite familiar to me. And also when it comes to confronting the police, that's something I've done a lot of, like physically gone and put my body in the way of places. The thing that was difficult about Calais was that it wasn't my political sphere to be active in. I couldn't go and confront the police in their brutality towards child migrants, because the ramifications of that wasn't going to be visited back on me. I was going to leave, and then the child migrants were going to get hit by the police even more. So there was this incredible sense of helplessness, of there was something that I wanted to be doing something about, and I couldn't. So I basically drew a really honest representation about my time in the camps. There's two things I left out. So there's a representation of a riot that happened, and it was all women who were guarding the perimeter of a space, and then it got rushed by men and refugees who were searching clothes and stuff. In the process of that, one of the other women who I was with got like she got sexually assaulted by a male refugee who put his hands on her. Now, I didn't put that in the comic, not least because it didn't directly happen to me, but also because there is a very strong stereotype that all refugees are rapists, which are put out actively by the far right in the UK. And I didn't want to add to that in any way. So even though this was something that I saw, I edited that out because I thought that interaction between that nasty man and that woman would become representative of something much larger if I put it in the book. And the other thing that happened was when I was there, me and Jet and my husband, like I went with my partner and I thought it would be great having my partner there. But actually it was quite hard because when you've been with someone for 20 years, you can you can be kind of rough with not rough with each other, but do you know what I mean? You're not being polite with each other. You know each other very well. And everything was so raw and so difficult that there was one night where we just all ended up drinking a bottle of wine and arguing really badly. I didn't put that in the book. It didn't add anything to the narrative. It happened, but I thought I'll gloss over that bit. There is a question when I make a book is that I try and create a narrative with an arc. So I try and create patches of light and patches of shade. And it was easy to find beautiful moments of the interactions with people that I met and to put those in, like genuine conversations with people, which were really gorgeous. But so I made sure that there was always light and shade in the book. But I didn't want to put all the shade in because otherwise you're just going to end up with a book which is grim. And who wants to read that? Okay. Should we do the last question? So, yeah, sorry, yeah.
I actually had a question. I raised my hand quite some time back. Sorry.
That's fine. I can't see anyone's hands.
It's okay. Sorry, really sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to. I was actually interested in the narrative aspect in your work. So I have two questions regarding that. One is when you document something like a refugee crisis, which is about who claims to have the greater right of possessing a narrative.
And sorry, I'm going to stop you because I didn't understand the word nap.
Can you am I like audible now?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just didn't understand the word nap, and I don't want to not get the question.
Yeah. Hello.
Oh, now you're breaking up. Sorry, can you just ask again?
Narrative aspect in your word, how you use words along with the comic, right? The narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
My first question is when you go to document something like a refugee crisis, right? Which centers around who takes possession of, who has the greater narrative right to be in the right and be in the wrong. Like, let's say a country versus a group of people, and how narratives frame these refugees in a particular kind of way. How do you what are the ways you do, what do you do to modulate that? Because you, as an activist and somebody who has been on the ground with them, with the refugees, how do you try to put set aside your perspective? Because I know you have like explained this, but I was interested in like in that comment that you showed, that white supremacist comment, right? That
Yeah.
these conflicts are the results of your own wars. Why don't you fix them, right? So in face of comments like this, how do you modulate the kind of narrative? Like, how do you modulate between the two sides? This is one. And
Okay.
the second was, at one point you had mentioned in passing, I think, that comics, that when you're drawing a comic, it's easier, the identification, the fear of being identified becomes minimal, right? It's not documenting like in the conventional way. So in that case, don't you think does that offer you a greater chance at universalization? But then each refugee crisis has a separate context of it, right? So does that universalization practice kind of blur that specific contextuality?
Yeah, okay, so there's two questions, one about universality and one kind of more about objectivity. I'm going to take the second one first. So universality, I was interested to see if in the Safelandia comic I could actually remove the colours from people, because I'm aware that when people see a picture of a brown person or a lighter brown person or a darker brown person, that then comes with baggage. And I was wondering whether I could make like some of the people green and yellow. Obviously, when you make a physical image of someone, you're making something that will then be read by other people as a specific thing. I think what's really interesting is to look at how Art Spiegelman gets around this with Mouse, because he makes all the Jewish people into mice and all the Nazis into cats and the Polish people into pigs, which is really interesting. So he's specifically making a statement where by using animals, he's tapping into that universality. And getting away from images of people as people. I mean, I didn't do that but I would say that what I do is I create very human representations of people and allow you to meet people through the comics. Okay, the previous question about narratives, privileges, and objectivity is that I do not pretend to objectivity in my work. I don't believe that objectivity is a thing. I think when people are claiming to be objective, they generally are hiding behind a power ratio where they say, oh, we're objective. This is the objective fact. But it almost never is. It's always coming from somewhere. So my job as a cartoonist is to tell a story with all of the emotional content at my disposal. So I will ratchet up the emotion behind what I do, and I will use color, I will use framing, I will change I will trim the words down so that every single one of them counts. And I will put little kids in, and I mean, but it's not difficult to make what happened at Calais really affecting and moving, because it was really, really hard. It was really difficult, and it continues to be. One of the things that I dislike about my book, looking back on it, is that I use the phrase refugee crisis, because I really just think that crisis is the wrong word for the situation, because crisis implies a short lived period of something that then has a solution. And what we do not have is any kind of solution to a problem that is only getting bigger. Okay, I'm gonna do the two written ones from the chat, and then I suppose we should just see. I can't see your hand, so if you do have a verbal question you want to do, just want to stick your name in the chat, and I'll come to you after these two. Okay. Since you're emphasizing on the writing of the comic just after your return from the refugee camp, can you elaborate on the role of memory in your writing process vis-a-vis storytelling? Well, that was immediately done. So Threads was immediately written in response to my immediate return from the camp. I mean, I've done quite a few graphic biographies where I construct a story, and that's a very different process. So with the Rosa Luxemburg story, I read all her letters, I read all her books, I read various biographies of her, I deconstructed her story, and then I reconstructed it in almost kind of like a filmic way. But when I was making the graphic biography of Rosa Luxemburg, I was creating a narrative of her life and her work, illustrating the themes of her work. It's called Red Rosa, recommend it. But I wasn't trying to, I mean, with Threads, I was making a graphic reportage from a particular place in history. So it was very different. Obviously, memory had nothing to do with my Red Rosa book, because I don't actually remember Rosa Luxemburg personally. I have recently, looking around for a subject for a subsequent graphic biography, I did approach somebody who's still living to ask if I could make their story. And that isn't going to go anywhere, because I can't make a graphic biography of someone who's still alive, because I'm faking all of their memories into the book, and they have their own memories. So it wouldn't work. So I just have to wait till they die. Okay. I'm wondering how, okay, there's a question here that says, I'm wondering how difficult it is to portray violence in the graphic representations and when the target audience are children. Well, my target audience isn't children, so I can put all the violence in that I like. When we draw, represent any political, historical, social situation to a graphic work, how can we shadow to be subtle and not very offending to anyone, apart from using anthropomorphism? Do you mean like using animals instead of things? How can it? Yeah, I mean, it's hard making racial. When caricatures are offensive is when it feeds into existing power dynamics. And actually, when you look at French cartoons like the Charlie Hebdo, you see a lot of very offensive cartoons. It's like they try and be offensive. You'll see, it seems to particularly be a trend in French graphic novels. They'll quite unquestioningly, you still see it in the Asterix books, they'll make an African character with thick lips and a bone through their nose. And that is offensive. That is straightforwardly offensive. Just don't do that. But I'm not really generally making caricatures of people. I made an exception on the Escape to Safelandia comic where I use caricatures because I just wanted them to be cute and also kind of like to be sort of an every person. But in general, I work from photographs. Like when I'm getting people up, if I'm changing their identities, I'll still work from source photos. You'll see me Googling old Iranian woman. So I've got a photo to work from. So I'm just making representations of people. I'm just making a lot of them. And I don't think it's any more offensive to make a representation of a person with a color pencil than it is to make a representation of them with a camera. There's someone agreeing with my vision of objectivity. I think it's out the window on documentation journalism and graphic journalism. Thank you very much. Okay, there's something here that says, was there any ideal element that you wanted to express in your works but found challenging for the comic medium? If so, how did you overcome the challenge? Okay, it's quite hard to represent time passing in a comic. You have to find little ways around that. Comics are quite a tough medium. You can't, like, you've got so few words to explain what you want to do. And after I've been doing it for like 30 years, I'm really good now at reducing the number of words down to the absolute minimum. You've only got a couple of phrases per frame on your comic, and you have to get the story across in that. So that's something that's hard, is like getting rid of the words. And nowadays it's the question that if I'm ever asked to write an article, I find it quite hard to hit the word count, because I can't waffle. I can't just add extra words in when I'm writing, because I spend all my time trying to trim them out. Another thing that's tricky about the comics medium is that you've got an abstract concept and then you've got to get into visual format. And because I'm not, I mean, if I was just doing Batman comics, it'd be straightforward. All of the frames and the action are all very formulaic in those things. So you're working with a set kind of number of pictures and frames. But I'm not trying to show superhero and woman tied to train tracks. I'm not trying to show that story that's already been told before. So, God, what am I doing at the moment? I'm doing a frame where I'm doing a page where sorry, what am I doing? I'm doing a page where there's some like some people in a farmhouse, and they've got a baby that they're having to look after, and she's being fed some bread and water mush, and then she's going to get colic and be crying all night. And so how I get that on the page, it's always a puzzle. I mean, I really enjoy the puzzle, but it's kind of tricky. Here she is crying all night down here. But it's just physically where you put things, it takes a while to work it out. And it's always fresh and different for me, because I'm always doing a different comic. It's never the same comic twice.
Thank you so much, Kate. I mean, with that, we wrap up today's session. And a big thank you to everybody in the audience for participating and for asking the questions. But most importantly, a big thank you to Kate for accepting our invitation and for agreeing to be a part of Drawing Vulnerabilities, and for being a part of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies here at the University of Hyderabad. Thank you for your extremely engaged lecture, your talk. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody in the audience for coming, for engaging with Kate and with everybody else. And we hope to see you on the 10th of April, where we have Arga Manna, who would be delivering his lecture as part of Drawing Vulnerabilities. We'll be sharing the information on our social media platforms. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And the video of this particular talk would be up on the UNESCO Chair for Vulnerability Studies website, as well as the YouTube page. So we do hope that all of you can check it out. So once again, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kate.
And thank you for having me. It's been really great to be able to put this together. Thank you.